Hello and welcome to Beyond Top 10 Tennis. My name is Dr. Ashley Morgan Berge and I'm your host. I'm the author of 11 books, CEO of 12 years, a founder of a startup set on data privacy, but most importantly, I am an elite performance coach of over 18 years working with athletes throughout Europe, the United States to Australia. And I think most excitingly, and why we're all here, is that I am the world's leading scientist on coach and athlete performance, specifically when we're looking at tennis, and I'm behind the landmark findings on how to develop a top 10 tennis ranking. That's right, and I know I share different perspectives or points with each episode that comes, and it's just so exciting in the best possible ways of being able to break down the specific fundamentals that really lead to developing that elite athlete that is set. They're prepared to become a top 10 tennis player, and we even look at players still ranked inside the top 20 and what they really need to do and integrate into their game to cross the threshold and become a barrier breaker. Which brings me to that I am behind theories from the optimal performance theory, the V by Dr. B, and the rule of transference, having coined terms from the barrier breaker to the golden rule and countless others. As has become custom in each episode, we dive into one of my books and really dig in and share additional insights. And if you have been following along, we've been focusing on the secrets to optimal performance success, a comprehensive discussion on developing elite coaches and players. And we have hit over the halfway point, which is really exciting because it's one of my favorite books because it really sets the foundations, irrespective of what level you're at, whether you're 900 in the world, 30 in the world, it doesn't matter. There are it's so rich of such important information here to really implement into your game, and irrespective of that level, there's always going to be something different that you can implement at that given point in time. So today's episode is no different, and it's really set towards the coaches in that perspective, but also the players to really dig deeper and ask themselves some important questions. So buckle in and enjoy the ride. Thank you so much for joining us today. I guess like I've shared in the intro, this is no different than the other episodes in respect that it's just so important, fundamental to integral to implementing these facets, I guess, into our games if we're looking at developing that top 10 tennis ranking. And again, it's irrespective if you are at a tennis academy starting out or, you're playing your local tournaments to national tournaments. It's so fundamental. Or you could be top 500 in the world, top 50 in the world. There's always something new that we can take away. And hopefully, look, there's a saying that the smarter you get, the more you realize you don't know. And I know it's ironic in that respect, but it's the same is applicable as a player. So as you progress your performance at the elite level, the more you realize you don't know in respect to what's out there, the latest that's out there. And I guess specifically I'm talking to those players inside the top 50, top 30, top 20, going, what's stopping me from breaking into the top 10? Like, what's holding me back? And look, specifically here, we've got the roadmap and I guess the foundations there to really progress and ascend towards the top 10. And that's where the science comes in. That's what the data is all about on what you really need to do to cross the threshold. And it's probably a really important reminder to say that all of the work, all of the research has been conducted on the elite crop of players. So we're specifically looking at players ranked inside the top 100 on the WTA and ATP tours and specific differentials there. And we've done this over a period of time. And if you want to have a look at the numbers, I mean, if you read the bio, that was over 121,000 inferences, not like 10,000, not 100,000, not 50,000, 121,000 that has progressed to 150,000 different inferences, which is essentially unheard of. Typically, when we're looking at research, we could look at 10 or 20 people or participants, or 100 if we're lucky. But then you do have the research that goes the next level to 1,000, but then it gets even more exciting. And I think I share this for, I guess, the more hesitant to skeptical ones out there, to say it's not opinion, it's not subjective in that respect. We've got the data that does the talking. And I think when we're looking at something so integral as developing a top 10 ranking and what's behind that, and we're really talking about a world first, something that has never been done in the history of sport before. As in, what specifically does that, that less than 1% take? So when we're really focusing on the sport of tennis, we've got athletes such as since Wimbledon is on at the moment, the athletes such as Djokovic, who's obviously the sole active player with Nadal sidelined and Federer now retired, and also, I think most importantly, Serena retired in that respect. And I mention these four because they're the most successful in their own right when we're looking at Grand Slam championships and their wins. And Serena Williams in that respect, I think, on her own, which is very important because we've touched on before that gender does not actually come into play. And that is why Serena is such, I think, an incredible athlete in this respect, because her performance is synonymous with and has direct, correlations with the ATP Tour, from the level of knowledge base when we're specifically looking at the 7 keys, so the fundamentals responsible for developing a top 10 tennis ranking, but also staying there for so long. And that's what I think those 4 have in common, is the longevity and what they've been able to do, and we know why they've been able to do it, and the key relationships and the specific, I think, dynamics that interplay with their performance. And believe it or not, I'm sure it's no surprise that all 4 of them have specific correlations in that respect. So it's no fluke, it's no, how. It's these 4 players, irrespective of, male or female, it doesn't matter. They were able to fine tune and master these, key facets of play, and they've also been included and have played a fundamental role in looking at what it really takes to develop a top 10 tennis player. And it's okay. It's obviously, since our data it's huge. It's not just these 4. These are just 4, obviously, I'm sharing because they're very well known and their accomplishments are all, near world first in their own right. Serena the first to get to 23, obviously Federer the first to get to 20, then Nadal the first to get to 21, and Djokovic obviously the first, I think, to surpass that as well. So different firsts in their own right, which is incredibly exciting. But also, if you are that top 20 player, there is hope. You can do that. All it takes is to learn and integrate and implement the 7 keys, plus a little bit more, which I'll say for later. And when I say for later, for future episodes, because it's in the works to be released later this year. So, which is really cool. And I haven't actually shared that before. So if you've been listening, it's all wrapped up inside this. But getting back to the point, when we're looking at the data, the science, really stripping back what it takes to develop that top 10 tennis player, we're looking at obviously this text, The Secrets to Optimal Performance Success, and its applicability irrespective of what level you're at, because there's always something new that you can, I think, pull apart and add to your performance. And look, today's chapter is no different, and it's so important and I think often forgot. So look, if you're following along today, we're on page 132. But the premise is, are you proud of yourself? And what about your players? And I think the heading says a lot, and we're going to dive into that. But often what can be lost along the way, or a common saying, obviously lost in translation, right, is that each and every player, athlete out there should be so proud of themselves for the work they're putting in, because let's remember, not every person plays sport, and not every person aspires to become a professional athlete. Not every person actually puts in the work and shows up to training multiple times a week, if not nearly every day, and they have, I think, that hairy, scary goal that they're working towards, whether it's to win a local tournament, a national title, the Orange Bowl, or to qualify for their first Grand Slam, or to get deeper into a Grand Slam, heading to all those quarters, the semi-finals, and eventually win a Grand Slam title. Now, irrespective of where you are on that spectrum, of course you should be so proud of yourself. Though, too often than not, a lot of players and athletes are not, or they do not take the time to step back and look at how much they've accomplished. And I think it's a very common trait in that respect, because we have that tendency to be so focused on our end goal, rather than being mindful of and ticking off those milestones that come in between. And you can look at like a mountain, right? And it's like, even though you're halfway up that mountain, you got halfway, and you should be so proud of yourself. Or you're at the beginning, and you know what? You should be so proud of yourself that you are starting at the bottom of the mountain. It doesn't matter that you're not at the top yet. And whilst the top of the mountain, the peak could be, the ultimate of winning a Grand Slam title, or it could be winning 5, 6, irrespective of what it is, it's going to be different for everyone, and that mountain's going to change. And you could be that local academy player, and the top of your mountain is that first title. Because everything, I think, it's obviously individual, and it's depends on the player and their core or sole purpose of why they are playing in the first place. It could be to play your first tournament abroad, so overseas. It is incredibly unique and different. And a lot of players take, I think, the same pathway, but others can, there's a minority that take quite different pathways. And I think the most important reminder there is that irrespective of that pathway, more often than not, you still arrive at that same destination. And again, it's important to remember that we're all human. And from previous episodes, we reminding or being mindful of that and taking that humanized approach. So when we're looking at that mountain, it's applicable just for the coaches and the parents. And I think the status in that respect, that how you frame that, but also that you are a role model for your child and or athlete player to pick up on that. And this is something that too often than not falls through the cracks, irrespective where you are, whether you're based in Australia, the United States, Europe, or somewhere else in the world, it doesn't matter. Being proud of yourself is too often synonymous with almost just ignoring it. It's like, no, I'm going to be proud of myself when I, get to the top of that mountain. And it's so important to just reframe that and say, no, of course you're going to be proud of yourself when you get to the top of the mountain, but there are all those incremental steps along the way, and you have every right to be proud of yourself in each and every step. And an athlete player does not pick that up. The child does not pick that up unless it is shown to them, taught to them, and they are encouraged to embrace that. And that's, I guess, the pretext of the chapter here, because if you are not, I guess, setting the scene for your players or athletes, and obviously this is to the coaches out there, about you should be so proud of yourself and to let them know that you are proud of them. And I think if you are a coach and you do not have the capacity to share that, if you do not have the capacity to communicate that, you probably need to ask yourself some hard questions about your place, I think, on the coaching spectrum. And, do you hold your athletes and players in the highest regards that you want them to obviously succeed? Because it's so important. And for the parents and or guardians out there, this is so important to make sure not only you're able to share this with your child, but also you are mindful of whether or not this is, I think, reciprocal between, I think, that your child and that coach in this respect. And this brings us back to that triangular relationship there, where the parent guardian is involved. I think with that, I guess, interplaying dynamic between, the athlete and the coach, to make sure, I think, you're keeping tabs from afar, but also you're having those conversations with your child, but also the coach, to make sure these, I think, little facets, they're actually quite significant when we're looking at, building the long game or following the pathway and progressing towards, I think, the elite crop of play, and setting themselves up to progress towards the top 10 in later years. So obviously this is focused on players who are yet to, say, break into the top 500, 300, and so on. Though most specifically, if you are that player inside the top 50, this is a conversation to maybe not necessarily to be had with your parent and or guardian, but your team and I think the ones closest to you. And that could be, and for many, your parent and or guardian, or your parents at this stage, though it's so integral to have a voice of reason that's able to step back and to look at this. Because irrespective, again, what level you're at, athletes have a tendency to, I'll say metaphorically, beat themselves up. And I say this because it's the tendency to get down on themselves and to be very negative. And again, we are human, and it is obviously a humanized, I think, facet. It's a behavior of being human if you're not nudged in that right direction. And when you put your self-worth and your values are tied into your performance, and if you win, then you're exceptional, but if you lose, that you're really down on yourself, it's so important to be able to, I think, flip that or turn that switch off when that happens, that you're able to be a bit, upset with yourself for a small amount of time, but your self-worth should never be correlated with that. And that's where we get into the discussion of, is your coach teaching you? Are they communicating with you that they're proud of yourself irrespective of the result? Likewise with the parents and or the guardians, dependent obviously the age of the athlete. Because you could have a brutal loss and you did not play well, but there's always going to be a takeaway, a positive takeaway that you can learn from that. And for the coach to be able to share that with that player athlete is absolutely fundamental. And that's the same for the parent and or guardian. You could inadvertently be putting pressure on your child, but remember, irrespective of that result, they are still a child. And that's irrespective if they are 12 or 18, that they still are. And it's so important to put that equal amount of value there, whether it's that win or that loss. Because if we only say we're proud of you every time you win, there becomes a negative association with a poor performance. And that obviously has a significant impact on that child athlete's overall emotional and mental well-being. Irrespective of the mental conditioning that's put into play, it is absolutely, I think, important to set the precedent that irrespective of that. So with that, I think that long introduction there about this, I'll dive in and share different, I think, aspects of this chapter, and hopefully there are some good takeaways for you. We all grow up eventually. We all grow into the people we want to become and are continually striving to become that person. As professionals, there is always room for growth, for development, but there is also a choice. And I think that is so important, that there's always a choice. And to foster that ability to choose, to foster that ability to want to improve, it's vital to the core, because it's what sets the stage for an athlete wanting to continuously challenge themselves, to continuously progress, but also reach that next level of play. We all get to choose whether or not we want to develop and grow as a person, which is reflected through our profession. However, if we are happy and content being right where we are, we remain in our comfort zone and our growth is put to a halt. And I think in a way this is a catch-22, because we want to continuously progress and be happy with those progressions and find, I think, a plateau that we are continuously building on, opposed to finding that plateau and staying there and just being happy with that level of play. If you get to that point, that's, I think, synonymous with a social player, a recreational player that does not obviously aspire to get inside the top 10 tennis rankings. And it's the same when it comes to coaches. If you are happy of being at a certain level, that's fine, that's okay, because we need coaches like you more than ever. Though, if you are working with an athlete that aspires to become a top 10 tennis player, you need to make sure you have those skills, that you are privy to the 7 keys, that you are upskilling. That's absolutely fundamental. And I know I've touched on this before, but that's obviously where AMA International comes in, because a lot of coach education providers, they are not up to date with that latest research. And that's also why AMA International was built, because we noticed this gap, but also we wanted to make sure the knowledge was accessible to everyone. If the knowledge was to be shared with coach education providers exclusively, that would restrict the distribution and availability to coaches like you out there, if you are not affiliated with a certain federation, but also parents not being affiliated with certain federations. And that's obviously why I think the new research here and what leads us towards a top 10 tennis ranking, it's one, so exciting, but it's so critical, because we're also looking at mitigating injuries. So if you are one of those coaches, players and parents, and you're looking at, I think, collectively, collaboratively, working towards the top of the mountain, that is a top 10 tennis ranking, that's obviously where we come in. And it's so critical and fundamental to find that plateau and keep pushing boundaries. As coaching professionals, our responsibilities do not only fall to ourselves, but they fall to those we are responsible for. our players and our athletes. And a comfort zone is no place for an aspiring athlete to become comfortable or stuck. And what this talks to is, I think, the role model status obviously a coach plays, and that whether you like it or not, your player or athlete, they are going to copy those behaviors, which means if you are comfortable at your level, then there's a high likelihood that that player, no athlete, is going to get comfortable at that level. You may be at a plateau in your career and you are comfortable, but there are other facets that you are able to upskill in, whether it's different forms of education, different forms of fitness, and different skills, irrespective, I think, where that lies, it's still following the same trajectory. So I'm not saying, obviously, you need to also put in the work to become a top 10 player. It's different for coaches, but the knowledge is incredibly important. That's what sets the scene. That's what equips you as a coach to have the skills to develop a player that has the capacity to ascend inside or towards the top 10 tennis rankings. If you are not putting in the work, if you are not, I think, leading by example of pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone, and for the parents out there as well to be able to have these open conversations with your child, because this is what really sets the precedent. We want to set our child, our children, our players, athletes up for success. And an indirect way to do that is so incredibly easy is to lead by example. And coaching professionals recognize and are aware of the impact they have on their players and athletes throughout the time they are working together. However, a lot of coaches tend to forget this level of influence. And this is so important. And I've touched on this in, previous episodes, and I think I've shed different lights on this respect, because I think there are a lot of coaches out there that ignore this level of influence, and it's also irrespective of that level that you're at. There are, especially I think at that academy level, and it's not necessarily synonymous with a certain level of age or experience, but there's a very big gap there. And it really depends on who you're working with, and typically that's less than 10% of coaches out there. So if you are a coach listening, please prove me wrong, please. Because, or maybe you are one of those coaches listening inside the 10%, and I think if you're listening, in a way you are upskilling, so you're probably inside that 10%, so thank you and kudos to you. But it's so important to be mindful of this, especially for the parents, that a gap does exist. And that is why that triangular approach is so important for you as the parents now I'm talking to be mindful of this, because it's always about, I think, pushing the dial a bit further, and you want, I think, that influence around your child. And it's not necessarily going pushing. You want to obviously be able to hone a skill and work on that skill. We're talking about, I think, the status that's there. Obviously, that good rapport there, that open dialogue that's there. The ability to have those open conversations is absolutely important. Okay, here we go. It is necessary to point out that regardless of our personal views and the responsibilities we have to ourselves as professionals primarily, is that we take on board the responsibilities in becoming and committing to being a coach to benefit and help our athletes. And I think this says it all, because at the end of the day, a coach is there to help that player, that athlete. Though it's also inadvertent to make sure, even though you're there to help them, it's also in your actions and your behaviors on a day-to-day basis that has a direct influence on them. Obviously, especially if they are around, absolutely. And when they're not around, that's a little bit different. I think you're able to let your hair down. However, if you are showing that on social media and your players, athletes have access to that account, then no, that's not a sidestep there. You're able to, I think, distinguish your private and professional life. I think ensuring that your private life is kept private. And I think this is where the lines are blurred for a lot of coaches out there, is that they have, I think, their players and athletes on their social media, and their social accounts obviously may have content that's not necessarily in that professional context. So I think it's very important to be mindful of that. But it's the same with the parents who end up becoming, best friends with the coaches. Sure, on one hand, that's okay, but you need to make sure that line is drawn and that professional standards obviously are there and they are met, and that there's a time and place when that obviously that professional hat goes on both sides, but also to make sure the same applies for the athlete, the player, the child, and to be mindful of, I think, that separation there. And the private, the professional, how that potentially impacts on the player athlete, to make sure, I think, a really healthy precedent is set and a line is drawn. And I know that is a bit long-winded / a bit complex in nature, but at the end of the day, it's really simple. It's just about being able to draw a line, draw that line in the sand, so to speak, to say private, professional, but there really is no line there if everything is blurred, everything is mixed together. So you really need to be cautious in that respect. But I think on that note, it's so important to, I think, bring the discussion back to, if the coach is proud of themselves and or of the athlete. And obviously, I think this more personalized approach from the coach's perspective, and if they are upskilling, are you proud of yourself as a coach? Can you say that? Please, I hope the answer is yes. If not, obviously there's work to do to find, I think, your own mountain that makes you proud of yourself, and to follow, I think, the steps in place to get to that next milestone, just one step to the next, to climb your own mountain, I think, obviously metaphorically and respective to your own professional to private goals. And when you're able to share those, I think, those milestones as a professional, and to be able to almost just exuberate that you are proud of yourself. Obviously, I'm not talking on a day-to-day basis and just really saying it on every occasion, every opportunity you get. That's not what it's about. It's being able to, I think, demonstrate, illustrate to your athletes that you know what it takes, and that you have your own goals that you are working on. So it also encourages that child, that athlete, that player to have their goals that they are working on, and they learn over time to become proud of themselves. What that really means, what it means to you and them, and also for the parents listening, please. And that also then is able to reinforce that, and making sure that being proud of yourself is not synonymous with a performance or a result. It's saying, I'm proud of myself because I did this, or that I showed up, because it can be as simple as that. Because showing up can be incredibly daunting for, half the population out there. Because obviously we do have introverts and extroverts, and that's no different on the sporting spectrum. It's also no different on that coaching spectrum as well. And that's, again, taking that humanized approach, it's no different. and likewise for the parents out there. So being able to share it in your own way, how your player athlete, I think, best corresponds for the coaches out there is so important. Because look, at the end of the day, athletes, players, children, they go through those losses, they go through those hard times. And also at the elite level, not everyone wins every match they play. And it's so important to be mindful of that and to disassociate being proud of yourself with the win. Be proud of yourself for certain performances. You may have lost the match, but your attitude could have been phenomenal. Be proud of yourself for that. And I think it's little milestones to markers in that respect that are so important. Okay, before we finish up, I'll just share one more additional insight. A direct result of this benefit is reflected in our attitudes towards ourselves. So I will ask, are you proud of yourself as a coach? Before answering this, please reflect on yourself, first as a person, and then second, how this impacts yourself as a professional, and if you are proud of the way you merge these personas. If you are, great, brilliant, wonderful, you are heading down the right path. So I think that's a good one to end on, because it really talks back to what I think we've just touched on. And it's so important to remember, I think, that the personal to professional. So the personal, private persona, and the professional, and the ability to be proud of yourself. Obviously, it's ideal if you can be proud of yourself on both forms, because in everyday life, when we don't have our professional hat on, we could be proud of ourselves that we have wonderful relationships with a member in our family, or our whole family, or we have wonderful relationships with our closest friend, or we have a wonderful circle of friends. It doesn't matter. And everyone's going to be unique and individual for whatever that means to them. There is no right and wrong. And I'll say that again, because again, for the adults in the room, for, the parents and the coaches, it does not matter. And if you obviously are the adult as the player, it's the same is applicable for you, because it means you're over 18 here and you are obviously, you have your personal, your private life and your professional, and it's so integral to be proud of yourself on both sides of the coin. But it's also equally important to be mindful of the two sides there, and that they really do reflect on one another. If you are an absolute mess and chaotic in your personal life, the chances are that is going to cross over into your professional life. And we know that. And so it's about, I think, refining your core objectives, what you are proud of yourself on, to write down, I think, your different milestones, or again, bringing it back to that mountain and what that mountain is to you, also from that private personal perspective, but also the professional perspective as well, and what you want to be able to accomplish and achieve, whether it's in 6 weeks, 6 months, 6 years, and really refining that. Because if we can write that down, we're really allowing ourselves to not put it in stone, but it's almost like a focal point that really we can use to recall why we are proud of ourselves, and because we are working towards this, and why, this is only the first step on the mountain, but I'm proud of myself because I'm at that first step. You could be halfway up, but writing that down is a constant reminder to say, I'm proud of myself because look how far I've come, and I'm already halfway. Irrespective, I think, of where and when and the time frame, it's important to be able to have those markers just as a point of recall to say, I am proud of myself. And ultimately, if you are that coach out there and you're able to do that, it does cross over, and that your player athlete is able to see that in your everyday behavior that obviously is visible to them. If your private life is private, your athletes, players do not have access to that, that's okay. But it's so important and fundamental to keep that. I think it's separate, and if it is not, You have to be very careful there, please. Okay, we're going to finish on today. Please be proud of yourself. If you are not proud of yourself, there is something. Dig deeper. You can be. Whether it's showing up today and listening and taking that first step, or you've been listening for a while now. Thank you so much. You've been taking those steps. You could be reading a book every 3 months. You could be reading one every week. It doesn't matter. But beginning to read that book in the first place, that's a step. Be proud of yourself, please. And again, when we're looking at the journey towards that top 10 tennis ranking, please be proud of yourself for showing up and being brave enough to have that crazy, hairy, scary goal that only, a handful of us around the world have had or have. And when I say a handful, obviously I know there's a big number, but who is committed enough to really see it through? So again, that's what we're about. We want to head towards that top 10 tennis ranking. And if you keep on listening, we'll get there. Thank you so much for listening today. I hope you had fun with this, because being proud of yourself, it's so important. I think it can be communicated in different ways, and obviously there are different facets to that conversation. To get your hands on the secrets to optimal performance success, please head on over to AM8 International. That is am8international.com. For any comments or questions, head on over to AM8 International or Topic Thread. It's the only social network that I am on. And again, for something a little bit different, my latest fictional release is at Pink Octopus Books. I will leave all the links in the bio and in the show notes. And that's also applicable if you want to come and say hi on social media, on our social platforms, whether it's Threads to Instagram to LinkedIn, even on Medium or Twitter. It doesn't matter. Please come and say hi, even TikTok. I would love to hear from you, and even your feedback. That would be great. Or if you are specifically listening on Spotify, please have a go at the Q&As to the polls, because I read them, and it gives us wonderful insights on how to shape future episodes. So I'm really looking forward to that. On that note, if you enjoyed today's episode, please don't be shy. Please share, like, follow, subscribe. And obviously, if you are on one of the platforms with the 5 stars and you enjoyed today's, please don't be shy. I'd really appreciate it. And for those of you who have, thank you so much. And we're only getting started. Look, on that note, I'm so grateful. Thank you so much for tuning in. And also, if you've been with us from the get-go, thank you from the bottom of my heart. I really appreciate it. And if today's your first episode, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it so much too. So again, on that note, I am your host, Dr. Ashley Morgan Berge, and this is Beyond Top 10 Tennis, and I'll see you next time.